Hey, welcome to session 15 of MarWorld Around the World. Here we're looking at New Caledonia. We finally got to midnight, so we've now entered Saturday the 24th. So I feel like we're getting close to the final stretch, maybe.
Yeah, just coming back from a power nap. I'm really happy.
So in this session, as I said, it was going to be New Caledonia. So New Caledonia hosts one of the most ecologically and culturally significant lagoon systems in the world, recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This session brings together perspectives from researchers, international NGOs, and the French administration.
So with us, we have a panel composed by two people from Caledonia now, in Caledonia now. Mohsen Kayal is a researcher at IRD, it's a French IRD, so Institut de Recherche sur le Développement in New Caledonia. And Julie Pesin, MARES alumni, is a fresh power project manager ocean at WWF in New Caledonia. Hi everyone, hi to both of you. I propose we start with you, Mohsen. So we have before we introduce, you can introduce with more detail what you're doing. We have a video of 2 minutes about an example of what you're doing with coral reef in New Caledonia. So see you in 2 minutes.
Depuis 2011, en Nouvelle-Calédonie, un suivi de recrutement corallien est réalisé chaque année par des scientifiques du centre IRD de Nouméa et permet de suivre la qualité et l'évolution de la reproduction des coraux. Pour cela, dans un premier temps, sur différents sites représentatifs du lagon, les scientifiques installent des plaques en terre cuite quelques semaines avant l'événement tant attendu.
Donc une fois que la larve s'installe, elle se métamorphose pour donner un polype, donc un bébé corail, en gros c'est un estomac avec des tentacules. Et ensuite ce polype va se multiplier pour former ce qu'on appelle la colonie de corail. Le recrutement corallien, c'est un indicateur qui est intéressant parce qu'à la fois il reflète l'abondance des colonies adultes qui contribuent à cet effort de reproduction. Donc plus on a d'adultes reproducteurs, plus on va avoir de la formation de larves qui vont pouvoir venir s'installer sur les récifs. Et à la fois, c'est un indicateur de la qualité de l'habitat pour abriter ces jeunes coraux qui viennent s'installer en favorisant leur survie et de permettre qu'ils grandissent jusqu'à atteindre l'état adulte. Les valeurs qu'on a trouvées avec ces premières années de suivi au niveau du recrutement corallien montrent qu'on a vraiment des taux de recrutement qui sont beaucoup plus élevés que ce qu'on voit dans d'autres régions. Par exemple, en Polynésie, donc on a vraiment un suivi vraiment similaire depuis une vingtaine d'années. Le taux de recrutement, c'est de l'ordre de 5-6 recrues par plaque. En Australie, c'est plutôt de l'ordre de 20 recrues par plaque de recrutement. Et ici, on est en moyenne 35 recrues par plaque, avec des années exceptionnelles où on monte à 400 recrues par plaque en moyenne, avec sur certaines plaques 800 individus, plus de 800 individus sur une seule plaque de recrutement de 11 cm sur 11. Donc c'est vraiment des choses exceptionnelles. Et c'est une très bonne nouvelle parce que ça montre que voilà, quand il y a une perturbation, le récif est vraiment apte il est prêt à repartir. Donc les coraux sont prêts à venir s'installer pour reformer des colonies adultes.
So Mohsen, you're working in New Caledonia in IRD on the research site with Julie. We will see also the NGO site. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing?
Thanks for having me, Christophe. So at IRD, IRD is the French National Institute of Research for Sustainable Development. I've been a researcher there for the past 5 years, and I work mostly on issues related to sustainable coastal management. A lot of my work, so I've been working basically on coral reefs over the last 20 years, mostly in French tropical overseas, New Caledonia and French Polynesia. And most of my work, there's basically two aspects to my work. A first and main aspect is really field marine biology and ecology, in which we have different ways to monitor ecosystems, trying to characterize their dynamics and the drivers of their dynamics. So one of the key drivers is, as we saw in the video, the recruitment rates, like, the birth of new individuals into populations. And that's one of the example of important indicators of the health of ecosystems, because, as I was explaining in that video, is that the more you have recruitment, so birth rates, and the more when you have a crisis like a catastrophe or bleaching event, something that kills the corals, they have the capacity to grow back. So that's portion of my work is really to work with our teams at IRD and students to go survey, we go scuba diving and we monitor the dynamics of these ecosystems, different places around New Caledonia. And then I have another component of my work that is much more collaborative, where I really interact with many different scientists from different fields, but also many different societal actors that are not into the research world and that are in charge either to also monitor ecosystems or to take decisions for their management. So there's managers, there's NGOs, there's private companies that do environmental surveys, and there's participative science associations as well. So it's like, that's the other part of my work. We really work in collaboration with all these different actors to bring together all the different pieces of knowledge and try to have a systemic understanding of how these ecosystems work and what are the main drivers or limiting factors for their health.
Okay, thank you, Marcel. So in your video, you're saying that, the recruitment is much higher in New Caledonia than in the rest of French Polynesia, for example. Can you tell us a little bit more why? Do you have reasons that you have identified?
Yes, it's a good question because we don't have all the answers, of course. This survey, so as we were saying in the video, what we do here, we put artificial substrate, these little terracotta plates, settle there. And then we do that every year, and then we see how many recurrents appear. And we do that in the southwestern part of the lagoon, which is an area where the conditions do not necessarily reflect all the conditions around New Caledonia. So I don't think we can extrapolate what we measure here in this specific habitat as compared to everything around. What we can see is that already at the small scale of that lagoon, we have variability between different sites. And some of the sites, that don't have that many recruitments, but some of our sites are so far like world record in terms of number of new births per plate. It's probably a combination between the health of adult populations around that generate those larvae, some degree of connectivity so that the larvae can disperse and come to these sites that are very rich, and probably favorable conditions for them, which means probably the temperature is not too high, not too low. There's not too much pollution. There's not too much predation on those larvae. So we're far from understanding everything, but the numbers I was citing in that video were really the first years of that survey. And it's been very good news to see that they have such a high capacity to recover and to have high recruitment rates.
So after a few more years, so here you're talking about recruitment. So when the larvae settle, but you're also studying the rate of survival after that. So is the rate of survival of this high number of recruits also high?
Yes, it depends on species. We have very healthy populations overall in New Caledonia. We have one of our great PhD students at the moment is really working on analyzing those data. We have survey sites close to Nouméa and also far off on the very north of New Caledonia and very far west. And we go on these sites once a year, and then we compare recruitment, survival, growth rates, try to see how they differ in space and also how they differ between the main taxa. So I don't have all the response to your question, unfortunately yet, but our PhD student is really working on those, bringing out those results. So hopefully in
good
few
news
months
for your
we'll
PhD
have
student that you don't have all the answers then.
Yes.
I guess I could just follow up to Mohsen, where you kind of covered over your kind of the past like 5 or 20 years working with corals and seeing the change in the ecosystem that are underwater. I was wondering if you could tell us about perhaps some of the changes around like the policy conversations, or if the conversations you have with the other actors you work with, how that has changed over the past several years, if it has changed.
The policy, like the environmental regulations?
Yeah, or
For different stakeholders, I guess, in general, because you just said you exchange a lot also with different types of actors.
Yes. So one of the characteristics in New Caledonia, as you guys said, is it's a very unique, very rich system. And one of the characteristics is that it's a quite complex management system because there's different jurisdictions, and so there's many different actors that are involved into taking decisions. Most of the like aquatic coastal system that is near the inhabited islands are managed by the provinces. While the reefs that are further out in the ZDE are managed by the government of New Caledonia. And there's these 3 different provinces, and then at the more local scales, there's different actors that take decisions based on the communes, etc. And so one of the characteristics is that in New Caledonia, it's quite easy actually to have meetings where we have everyone in the room, all the decision makers. So the contact and the dialogues are very easy between the different like stakeholders and decision makers, I would say. One thing that is so far missing, and that's one of the work I'm trying to spearhead, kind of lead in New Caledonia, is try to really bring out quantitative measures of how well the ecosystems are doing. Because I know it's easy to once we have this knowledge, to transmit the knowledge and discuss it with everyone, it's easy. I don't know yet how fast they can respond. For example, if we need to put a new regulation to limit pollution or fishing, things like that, I'm not sure so far how fast that would happen, but I know the conversation is very easy because we often bring everyone in the room, as Julie knows as well. Like, we gather quite frequently, and it's very easy to interact and discuss. So for me, for the knowledge part as a researcher, a main challenge is really to bring out those what I would call the environmental diagnostics, like all the statistics of this data to say is it declining or not, and where it's doing well and where we need to have stronger regulation.
Good. Just before going live, Mohsen and Angeli, you were telling me that New Caledonia is small enough so that you can bump into each other's regularly. So Mohsen, on the research side, you said you can bring the science, bring the reality, the facts, the potential decision makers. Julie, you can also first talk about your journey before starting to work at WWF. But now at WWF, you are a different type of stakeholder, and you also have to work with the decision makers, but maybe also the researchers. So can you tell us a bit more about your journey to where you are now and what you're doing?
Sure. So I will not go back too far before, but yes, I arrived in New Caledonia 2 years ago. So I just arrived now at WWF, but before I was at the French Biodiversity Agency, OFB. So I was more on the funders part, so looking at projects, seeing what was our guidelines to make some conservation project to help the provinces, because we don't have the competencies here. It's the New Caledonian government, so we just need to support them to make conservation projects. So already everyone around the table, the projects that want to be funded, our guidelines, the government, the New Caledonian government, the French government. So you already need to have everyone
at the layers
table. So it's very important, and you also have some research projects, a lot of layers, and some research projects that needs to have further answers, but sometimes are a bit outside the new guidelines. So you need to discuss and to find a way. And now at WWF, I'm working mainly on emblematic species, but also on some big spaces. So for example, the place where Mohsen is working, one is called Entrecasteaux. So it's far north of New Caledonia. And for example, for us, we are going to work more on protecting those areas. So trying to advocate to protect some areas. Already it's protected entre Casteaux, but maybe we are gonna create recommended maritime areas for cargoes, not to avoid oil leaks and things like that. Or we are gonna create a zone to avoid. We're gonna work on spaces like that, and then we are gonna do research on emblematic species such as sea turtles. So, for example, green turtles, main nesting sites. So for us, it's very important to understand more because, as Mohsen said, there's a lot we don't know. Also on sea turtles, for example, because it's very far. So when we go to those places, it's two days of navigation. You have very limited times on the area. So you cannot do like research for the whole year, for example, to define the phenology of sea turtles. When do they come? When do they lay the most? When do they leave? You're going to go for 5 days. You're going to have a snapshot, and then you have to make decision based on that, which is very hard for decision makers to do because there is a lot of things we don't know. So what we are trying to find is projects that's going to make us able to answer those questions with a limited budget, limited time. So we are going to do those kind of projects. But yeah, there is a lot of work with researchers to help us understand what we can do in with such constraints, to be able to make decisions, to be able to, I mean, we are not going to make decisions as WWF, but to ask the government to make the necessary decision. So it's quite a challenge, but very interesting, and yeah, it has the benefit of bringing everyone together.
So Julie, with WWF, you say that you're going, so you're not taking the decisions, but you're going on site and you're acting as a scientist. So can you tell us how at WWF we do science? Do we do science directly with WWF or also with researchers from ERD or from other labs? How does it work?
So it's a bit of everything. We have one section advocacy. So for example, those ones that are gonna just stay in the main city and advocate, for example, to avoid the deep sea mining. So we had actually a moratorium signed not long ago. We have a second lecture, but this is one big section of WWF. Then you have just the project. So you are trying to fund project, to find fundings. We have some of it also at WWF France, but we need new funds all the time. So we are searching for that. And then we make new projects mostly with associations. So for example, for sea turtles, there is a main nesting site in Bourail, where it's a huge nesting site for loggerhead turtles. And there is some challenges due to the sand being dark. So it's increasing the temperature, altering the sex ratio, high mortality, still a problem with poaching. So we are focusing, for example, on this site. But as the one before me, Hugo Bourgogne, also did a PhD with WWF and IRD. And so it checked the connectivity between this site in Bourail with the far south of New Caledonia, where the sand is lighter, so difference in temperature. We have more males, for example. We saw that those two areas connect. So we know that there is some genetics flux around here. So when we have the competence, we can do the research. When we don't have it, we ask for others, either association or research institute. I would say mostly association usually because we are an ONG, so we are trying to support association. But if needed, some research is needed, we can just include them in the process. And for those studies, for example, in Entre Casteaux, I'll be the one going there because I have the background to do the field work with my previous experiences. But if I didn't have this experience, I would have asked some other people. And on the boat, we are going to have 3 spots, and we are going to look for people in IRD. We know there is a very good someone managing the drone very well. So we're going to check if she's available or not. We are going to check all the competencies we can find because it's a small world. So we're going to check who is available, who can do that, in order to have all the expertise we need for the study. Yes.
it's very interesting for us all around this 24-hour life to see that the experience that people live somewhere, it's also something shared with others, sometimes on two totally different ecosystems. Julie, Mohsen, you say that, especially Julie, it's hard to go in some distant places. You cannot know what's happening there all through the year. And it's the same, we were talking about that with Steve Como in the Arctic. Most of the knowledge we have from the Arctic, it's more during the summer, which is not really warm, but and so sometimes it's hard to get the science really of all through the year or everywhere. So it's something shared in Arctic. And also you're talking here about turtles. So in 6 hours, if you're still awake, we're going to be, in the Seychelles. And Jacob is going to talk about his work at Frigate Island on the turtles, for example, which reminds you of your thing from your past.
Little bit.
Yeah,
I'm very happy to see that Mares continues working with a Frigate. I think after traveling, not a lot, but just a little, Frigate has really good research. We're already on top of what was being done on sea turtles, corals, on sharks most recently. So I think I just started going there. It was new, so I was like, oh, wow. But actually, they did really advanced research. They're really good on all, even marine birds, everything. So I'm very happy to see that Maris students are still going there because there is a lot to be done. And as I've seen as well that the lodge closed, so now they just have the island for themselves.
Yes,
I think it's almost
Jacob
finished
will tell
now.
us
But
how it is to be on the almost deserted island. And Anna Zora, who is a conservation and sustainable manager, will explain also a bit more. You have some questions for?
Yeah, I guess I have one for Julie. It'd just be interesting to know about what are the kind of like different priorities or perspectives having gone from the OFB to WWF, like in your kind of like work life, like how is it different moving from the kind of the different agencies?
So it's not so different, but for example, there is one project that was funded partly by the OFB, and now I'm doing this project. So I will have to give the deliverables to the OFB. So I just switched. But no, it's a bit different because the OFB can't make decisions on what they want to do. It's really they make it quite clear in New Caledonia that it's the government of New Caledonia we are supporting. So we can only be there if they want to make good actions, if they don't good conservation actions that in line with our policy. If it's not, we just are not going to support them, but we can't really do something they don't want to do. In New Caledonia, we are very lucky because the government is really for conservation. So it's been very fluid for now, but it could not be. With WWF, we are slightly more freedom about what we can do if we see some urgencies, some problem to tackle. But WWF also have this politic of not being against the government. So we are going to always be suggesting, but we want to still be at the table in the discussion, in the decisions. So we are not going to be very strong on some aspect. For example, for sharks, we had a bit of an issue here, some shark attacks, and then a lot of shark fishing. So it was terrible for the shark population, but WWF did not say nothing because it was quite a political case. And so we just did not do nothing at that point, not even a pause. So sometimes that can be a bit frustrating, but we have this position, which is in the end, not so far from the OFB. So that's quite in a role I have, in a discussion I have, is not so different. It's quite subtle actually in New Caledonia.
Maybe to build up on that, it's for both of you, but maybe Mohsen first now. How are people in New Caledonia, generally speaking, what's their relationship with the reefs? What's their relationship with the ocean compared to maybe like a French metropole, for example, or the places you've been to?
Of course, compared to French metropole, people are way more, close to the reef and the ocean in general. As people are, all these islands in the Pacific, most of them are small islands, and many people live off of fishing and eating fish, the food from the reef. In New Caledonia, it's slightly different compared to smaller islands that we see in the Pacific, for example, living in French Polynesia or other small islands, because there's a big land, the main island of New Caledonia, the land is quite big. And so in that case, you also have agriculture and, farming and things like that. So some people live mostly from the farms and other people mostly from the coast. So there's some variability on the main island. But then if you go to the smaller islands of New Caledonia, then their way of life is much closer to, let's say, the Polynesian way, where people have, small islands and really depend on the reef for food and livelihoods.
Julie, do you want to jump on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I've never seen a place where there is no tourism like that. Also, you have some small islands next to the mainland. You go and they are not expecting you. They are living their life. They are fishing. They are eating what they have, and they are not expecting you. You don't need to be there, really. So we really have people relying on the resources. In New Caledonia, we're also very lucky because for the fishing pressure is actually very low in all the ZEE. We have 14 ships. So it's still called industrial, but just 14 ships doing, how do you call that, long line? In English, I don't know.
Long lines.
Quite a sustainable way of, long lines fishing, just in the whole ZEE. So actually the resources are quite incredible here compared to our neighbors. So we're very lucky with that. There is still, of course, a lot of challenges, but yeah, people are very attached to the nature. It helps also for all the debates for deep sea mining, for all the extraction, everything. People are usually really attached to nature, so it can really help and being faced with them to defend, protect nature.
It's very inspiring. Anyway, you were talking about a few challenges. I know not to finish on that negative note, but what are the main pressures still acting on New Caledonia if it's not fishing?
So on my part, I would say for emblematic species, we are quite isolated. So for example, for population of dugong, when there is a drop in the population, it's quite problematic because there is no other genetic flux coming.
Because of a lack of connectivity with other populations?
Yeah, lack of connectivity. And then there is some challenges. For example, the dugongs, they are only in the lagoon. So it's more restricted. And there is some boats, not many, but we have boats. We have some very vulnerable species, actually. So it's sea turtle, dugong, even if the pressure are not very high, because they are very taking long to reproduce, sexually reproduce, to develop, and they are very vulnerable. It has an impact, so we need to be very careful. So for dugongs and even sea turtle bycatch, still boat collision, climate change, habitats, change of habitats, and mostly also poaching is still quite a big cultural thing to eat. For example, a sea turtle for a marriage, for a ceremony, and there is some derogation that can be given for sea turtles, but the quotas are not always respected. So yeah, there is quite a big challenge with that. The main thing is to do big awareness campaign, actually, because people don't realize, because we still have turtles compared to other places in the world. So when you arrive, you are going to see sea turtles easily, but they are small, they are not really ready to reproduce. There is very high mortality on the beaches, so it's hard for people to realize. But it's still a population really critically endangered, even though you might see some in the lagoon. So there is still some things to understand about that, and then all the same pressures really around the world with the climate change, change of habitat for dugong, the seagrass, so anchoring. Yeah.
Mohsen, do you want to add something to what said Julie?
Yeah, I would say New Caledonia basically reflects, I think it basically reflects the same issues we find everywhere with the ocean, but at a lesser degree. One reason is that because the coastal system is so big, it's so rich, it's so large, and the human population is so small and until now quite confined. It's like a small population living mostly around Noumea, and then when you go up, there's further away from the main town, there's less people. So you have less of those stressors. We do find, as was saying Julie, there's not too much fishing, mostly for the offshore fish. But we do find when you get closer to the reefs, for example, the nearshore reef, particularly around the habitat areas like Numea, we do start seeing some overfishing. It's just that the gradient of fishing, I would say, is less pronounced than other places in the world. So it's basically like if you had what you see other places, but maybe 30, 50 years back, when the pressure were lower yet and were not as damaged, as destroyed, as overfished. And it's kind of the same thing when we think of things like climate change, because mostly, particularly the south part of New Caledonia has been quite spared from bleaching events and big temperature shocks compared to other coral reefs in the world. And so it's basically something that has been preserved so far, but there is little signs that the same pressure exists if we don't, it's kind of coming increasingly. So it's kind of part of the challenge there, I think, trying to preserve as healthy as possible, to give a chance to nature, to all these coral reefs and other ecosystems to work on adaptation, acclimation, and like to find a solution to undergo, to survive the changes that are coming for them.
With what you say, it really seems that New Caledonia is a jewel, protected but fragile. I don't know, we are arriving at the end of this session, so I don't know if you will have like a kind of a take-home message that you would like to give to the audience in 30 seconds. Julie?
Sure. The only thing I can think now is don't forget the Pacific. There's a lot of research programs. Usually with the time zone, it's really hard to connect sometimes compared to the other time zone, but it's very rich. There's a lot of information on that. It's really interesting. So please, when you do projects in your next thesis, or I don't know what you're going to do next, think about the Pacific, try to connect either Polynesia, New Zealand, New Caledonia. There's a lot of things that is very rich, a lot of information, a lot of things to be done. So be curious about that and try to connect with us, because we have a lot of things we want to tell you. We know what you're doing. But
Ocean may have consequences. Also, the last two sessions were actually in Polynesia, in Hawaii, French Polynesia, and New Zealand. If you want to know more, Mohsen, conclude.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Julie said, and I would say, as you guys are a university program, there is, I think, like all these questions around marine science or coastal science and sustainability are a very big challenge for the new students that are coming out. There's a lot of work to be done, and that remains to be done, particularly for them, because it's the new generation coming, and they arrive in before it used to be all these potentials, and now everything is getting more restrained. Many things are declining, and it's a lot of things to manage, both in terms of natural resources and ecosystems, and also in terms of social interactions, equity. So there's a lot of things to be done in terms of sustainability and ocean and coastal science. So it's really great to have, like all these universities that form the new generation coming in there, and there's a lot to be done.
Interdisciplinarity and natural and social science together. Thank you to both of you, Mohsen and I hope your research is for what comes next. Well, in 30 minutes, we will be in Australia, comparing the southeast of Australia with access to marine mammals in cold ecosystem in the northwest, where it's quite tropical, more than tropical, in the corals. Merci à vous deux. Thanks to both of you, and see you one day later.
Thank you. Merci.
Bye.
Right.